Welcome to a meeting of the Town of Barnstable Comprehensive Financial Advisory Committee. Today is January 22nd, 2024. This meeting is being recorded by the Town of Barnstable on Channel 8, and you can see it after the meeting has concluded. The agenda is on the town website. So our first call of business is to have a roll call. So
Would you like-
Hector, if you could do that for us, please?
Sure, please. So Lillian,
Yeah.
Jim,
Present.
Neil,
Here.
Chris,
Here.
and Hector is here. That's 5. We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So the first item of business is to approve the minutes of the January 8th meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
I move.
There are two, can I bring up two issues?
Well, we have to second it and before we discuss it.
Oh,
I'll
Would
second.
you like to second it?
I'll second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. So now it's open for discussion for any changes or corrections. Neil?
yes, on the last page, it refers to the next meeting as on January 16th, meaning today's meeting, so that needs to be corrected to the 22nd. Shows up in two places.
Okay.
I will fix that.
Okay,
Thank
thank you. And the other thing is, just to follow up, on the top of page, or in the third bullet on page 4, it quotes Gareth as saying that the completion of the submissions would be done by the 19th. And I'm wondering if that actually did happen, if it did, can we get a copy of the final submission?
We have to circle back and do one more meeting with the town manager, so not at this time.
Thank you.
We'll get them to you as soon as we can.
Okay, if we can get that as a spreadsheet instead of a PDF, that would be great.
That's fine. Yep.
Thank you. Otherwise, I think it's good.
All right. With those corrections, we are ready to vote. So Hector, if you would call the roll, please.
Sure. Lillian,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Neil,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Hector's yes. Unanimous.
Thank you very much. We're very happy to have DPW here this evening, and I think I saw Griffin and Dan. So, gentlemen, if you would like to tell us about your CIP submissions, it's all yours.
Thank you. Dan Santos, Mark
Thank you,
Marinaccio.
Dan.
Mark Marinaccio, the town architect, is also present with us. So I thought the approach we would take tonight, since you had kindly sent along a number of questions based on some members' review of the program as it was submitted, we'd start by addressing those questions, because I think it makes sense. You put some thought into that, and it seems to be an area in which you have particular interest.
Thank you. Yes.
So the first one that I'll address, and I'll turn it over to town engineer Griffin, is you had reviewed and listed 2 categories of projects. One from last year, projects that were resubmitted that had not been recommended in fiscal year 24, and then projects not resubmitted in 25 after not being recommended in 24. So I'm going to go through those projects, and it seems to be, I'm not sure if whoever looked at it didn't have complete information or what, but most of them were resubmitted. So the first one, Town Hall fire suppression and interior improvements, that was resubmitted in this case, the specifics there, the interior improvement for this year's project is the elevator replacement. Old Town Hall, JFK Museum improvements, that was resubmitted. Katuitt Elementary School demolition, that was deleted as the school was transferred to the Katuitt Fire District.
Right.
So rather than the town being responsible for it, it's now been transferred and they own it. And I'm not sure at this point what their intention is. I think it's to renovate the building, but you get that information from them. Crosswalk improvements, we have deleted that project because we have budget remaining in other projects within that scope, so we can use those funds for any crosswalk replacements that we want to do in the next in the upcoming fiscal year. Old Town Hall basement storage was resubmitted. DPW parking lot improvements was resubmitted. Town Hall and SAB security improvements was resubmitted. Geyer Barn improvements was resubmitted. Equipment storage building, this was over next to the Barnstable Police Department. We deleted that project as that site is no longer available to the police department for construction of that facility. Stormwater improvements at impaired ponds. We don't have sites this year. They're being addressed with other projects, such as the Long Pond Sewer Project relative to Long Pond. We'll address the drainage issues through that project, as we will with some of the other ponds as we pursue work on them. So that was deleted, at least for this year. West Main Street and Pine Street intersection. That project has been moved over to the Chapter 90 program and will be funded via that program. Bismore Park improvements was resubmitted. 3-bay stormwater BMP design. This was kind of a nice to have based on grant funding, and we don't have grant funding at the moment for that, so we have dropped that off. We've done significant stormwater improvements in the 3 bays, and we've done the priority sites. So this is just some additional sites. If grant funding does become available, we will pursue other sites there. Sidewalks on East Bay Road, that was resubmitted and retitled. Burgess Barn improvements was resubmitted. And finally, sidewalk improvements on West Main Street was resubmitted, and it was renamed to West Main Street pedestrian improvements. So that covers that first question about projects that were not resubmitted in 25. That's the current status.
Yeah, just to follow up on the grant funding, is that just a timing issue where the grants, you basically you submit the project expecting grant funding and don't receive it? Or, I mean, what's the path there that for the grant funding? Is it?
Well, frequently we will submit a project for funding through the capital program, but we'll also at the same time submit applications for grant funding. Sometimes we have a good bead on whether or not we're going to get that. And I think with the 3 bays, we got several rounds. I think to the tune of $600,000 or $700,000 for grants for 3 bays stormwater. And we were just kind of pursuing that logically. But those funds, at least for the moment, have dried up, and our other priority stormwater projects are contained in other proposals. And if these were really significant to the improvement of the 3 bays, we'd be sure that they were on our capital list for otherwise funding.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Do any other members of the CIP subcommittee have any questions or
Yeah.
comments?
I just have one point of information. Chapter 90, Dan, what exactly is that?
Chapter 90 is the state law that covers transportation funding, and it's how the state distributes federal transportation funds to towns. And we get about $2 million a year through that program. It's based on primarily road miles. There's a couple of criteria, but it's a program that's been in place for many, many years. It's basically the gas tax funds that get distributed to communities, and Barnstable, with our extensive road network, is in the top 10 of funding statewide in that program. And occasionally, if they get additional funds, they will put them towards this program. And for example, the so-called millionaires tax that was implemented recently by the state. Part of that is going to transportation. And so we got additional funds this year through that, injected into the Chapter 90 program from that source.
Okay.
So
And-
is that for maintenance, repair, and new roads?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And-
we
But
can also
does not
buy,
cover the stormwater.
no.
Okay, thank
And
you.
we could also buy equipment. We've bought our
Hmm.
vac truck in the past. We've bought front end loaders. These are very expensive pieces of equipment. For example, our vac truck, which we use for mostly our drainage cleanouts, that's about a $700,000 piece of equipment. So
Wow.
when our OPCAP program is $500,000 a year for across all our vehicles, spending 600 or 700,000 on one piece really decimates that.
Yeah, really.
And the road miles criteria the state uses, I assume it's public roads, private roads aren't included in the state measure?
That's right.
Thank you.
Is that number still 40, how many miles is it, 47?
No, we have a total of 450 miles, both public and
400.
private. And we have 250 miles approximately of public roads.
Okay.
And that's
Thank
about
you.
that number is about 700 roads,
700.
public roads. So I'm going to turn over to Griffin. The subsequent questions, they're more technical in nature, and that's in his bailiwick. So Griffin.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dan. So a lot of the remaining questions had to do with the comprehensive wastewater management plan. So I'll try to take them one by one. And certainly if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to ask them.
Do you have a PowerPoint on that, Griffin?
I do not, no. I'm going
Oh,
off of
okay.
this. I'm going off of the questions that were submitted via
Okay,
email, so
all
I
right.
can read the questions first if that helps. And
That helps some of us who don't have it, yeah.
sure. So the first question I have was 9 CWP projects were submitted for 2025 in fiscal year 24 CIP. Fiscal year 25 only has 3 projects. What fiscal year 24 projects were consolidated versus delayed, and why? So I'll go through a list of the projects that were submitted in the fiscal year 24 CIP. Again, there were 9 of them as alluded to in the question, and then there are 3 that are requesting funding in this upcoming in the fiscal year 25 CIP. So last year's submission included Long Beach sewer expansion for design, $750,000. Effluent disposal alternatives, there was no dollar sign applied to that. It was listed as to be determined. Route 28 West sewer expansion projects, $35 million. Nitrogen removal improvements at water pollution control facility, $36 million. Headwork improvements at the water pollution control facility, $29.8 million. Finney's Lane sewer expansion, $32 million. Shoe Flying Hill Road sewer expansion, design, $900,000. Great Marsh Road sewer expansion, preliminary design, $300,000. Osterville Woods sewer expansion, preliminary design, $600,000. And Mill Pond dredging, final permitting, $50,000. What has been included in the request for this year, again, is 3 projects that consolidate some of the projects that were submitted last year, and I'll go through this in more detail right now. So the first one was actually just resubmitted as it was submitted last year, which is the Long Beach sewer expansion. It's submitted as design request for $750,000. That's apples to apples is what was submitted last year. The next project is the Route 28 West sewer expansion project. That's submitted for $59.65 million. Effectively, this project, as we've been advancing the design of this project for about 2 years now. And in doing so, there were design efficiencies that were identified that really warranted increasing scope of the project. So the project we've added over a mile of sewer to this project to more efficiently install the trunk mains that are going to be installed as part of this project and convey them, basically picking up a portion of Osterville West Barnstable Road and Bumps River Road out in Osterville in order to convey them to one of the major pump stations that's going to be installed as part of the project. That's the largest change to that project, and why you'll see a fairly significant increase in the project cost, as well as inflation, which is a theme that we'll see here with these projects.
Griffin, the 59 million project, what was that called again?
It's Route 28 West sewer expansion.
Okay.
So
Okay,
this project will extend the goal of this project is to extend sewer from down Route 28 from Finney's Lane, where our ongoing sewer expansion project will end, to Route 149. So that's the goal and the objective of that project. In doing so, we determined that the best way to do so, we had to include some sewer expansion along portions of Osterville West Barnstable Road and Bumps River Road, which added pipe that was going to be installed at a later date in a different project, but allowed us to produce a better project in the end. So the third project that was submitted is the water pollution control facility upgrades. This project is a large project. It's $109.33 million. This project will effectively rebuild two important parts of the water pollution control facility. In the FY24 CIP, you saw this project basically listed as 2 different projects.
Right.
It was the nitrogen removal improvements at water pollution control and the headworks at water pollution control. In the FY24 CIP, it was about $65 million. So there are a couple of things that have changed since then, but I'll give another little introduction into the project just so you can understand what the purpose of the project is and really what the benefit of the project is, right? So the project will effectively, the goal of the project is to reduce the concentration of the effluent discharge at the plant from our average concentration of 6 milligrams per liter of nitrogen, which is pretty good. Our permit actually requires us to do 10 milligrams per liter now, down to 3 milligrams per liter. So effectively cutting effectively cutting the discharge of nitrogen from the plant in half. Our CWMP is effectively predicated on this, as it allows us to reduce the amount of sewering that has to be done in the Lewis Bay watershed, because every amount of nitrogen that we put in the ground at the water pollution control facility, we have to remove in order to achieve TMDLs. Right. So splitting that discharge in half helps, right? So this project was 2 projects that were combined. In addition, there are recommendations of the water pollution control facility plan that are natural improvements to the plant that have to be made over the course of the next 10 years or so. A number of those recommendations are being incorporated naturally into this project, and some of them we made design decisions to pull into this project, frankly, because it made a lot of sense to do it at this time, right? Once you're going to do a substantial upgrade to a to a plant such as this, you want to try to work in all these upgrades at the same time.
So this is a consolidation of the water facility upgrades?
It's a consolidation of the upgrades, two of
Right.
which were on the CIP last year, one
Right,
of which was anticipated to be done over the course of a number of projects,
Right.
right?
right.
So it effectively is 3 projects all in one and is a substantial upgrade of the treatment plant. Let's see. So those are the 3 projects that were submitted. There were some projects that shifted timeframes as a result. None of the projects were removed from the plan. Some of them were either consolidated or shifted, right? Some of the reasons for that were, well, we just discussed the increased price tag in the FY25 submission. So some of the decision making around shifting projects really was financial, right? It's also some of the other considerations were, frankly, bandwidth with the amount of projects that are ongoing in each particular year, as well as ongoing changes to other potential projects that are existing right now. So the other projects that were modified, the effluent project, we basically moved that to be determined effluent funding out to fiscal year 26. We currently have funding for effluent disposal project for evaluation and design that we are working on this issue using right now. So we don't have a need for money for this project at the moment. We will as we can transition towards design, hopefully here in the coming year or two. So there will be a request at some point, but depending upon the solution, that number is to be determined at this point.
Okay,
Other projects that shifted were the Finney's Lane Sewer Expansion Project. We proposed to bump that out 1 year to fiscal year 26, really citing the financial and frankly the bandwidth considerations that I just mentioned. Shoe Flying Hill Road and Great Marsh Road were combined into one project in this year's submission. They were directly adjacent to each other. It made sense to do them as one project. Survey is actually ongoing in this whole area. So we're working off the existing survey budget right now. Wasn't really a need for any funding in this upcoming fiscal year, so we bumped the design request out a year as a result. The other project is the Osterville Woods Sewer Expansion Project. This project was the schedule of this project was modified, frankly, because it needs to be done after the 28 West project is done, because the flow from this expansion is going to go through the 28 West pipes. So it didn't make a lot of sense to continue on the schedule that we had proposed. So we pushed it back a few years in order to allow it to follow the natural progression of projects as we implement the program. So none of the projects that were submitted in last year's program have gone away. They've all either shifted a year or two, or they've been consolidated into different projects or combined projects. Any questions on this particular question?
what is the total projected cost on those 3 projects? The 3 projects for fiscal 25?
Let me one
I think
second.
The 169 million.
That's right. Yep. Just don't have the table directly in front of me. Thank you, Gareth.
Griffin, do you have any metrics with regards to feet completed or connections made? Are there any metrics that you track internally that you measure your productivity or performance to plan against?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So yes, and we've been revisiting that question actually recently as well, as to what are the proper metrics to be measuring success for, right? Annually, we're required to prepare an annual report for the CWMP progress, and we have to submit that to the Cape Cod Commission. It's found on the Barnstable Water Resources website. One of the things that we discuss in there are the length of pipe we've installed, which basically measures progress, right? and connections. Connections haven't started yet. They are anticipated to start this spring. So those will be the two main metrics we'll be looking at. Certainly as we transition into implementation of the water pollution control improvements, keeping an eye on what the concentration of that nitrogen ultimately becomes is important. That's something we have to report to DEP as part of our permit requirements anyway. But anything we can do to keep that number as far down, the goal is to be 3 or below. If we can do better than that, that's even better for the environment and for the program. So that'll be another metric that we're monitoring closely.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Now, last year, you were doing some design and permitting for the Old Craigville Road sewer and the Long Beach sewer and the Old Yarmouth Road sewer. Are they all complete? All the designs are good.
They're not. So those design requests were all for preliminary design.
Right?
And preliminary design, what that generally ends up being is we survey the areas. So we map the areas in question. So all the roads and the adjacent buildings will map to give us the basis for our design. And then we start doing some design internally to kind of lay out how we think the system's going to be. And then we transition into final design where we generally get a consultant involved. So the projects you referenced, the Old Craigville project is currently being surveyed. We have a contract with, I believe it's Coastal Engineers for that project. That should be finished this spring. Long Beach, we are in the process of developing an RFP for the survey. And Old Yarmouth Road, the survey is ongoing.
Okay.
But we have not transitioned into the design of those at this point. But that will be the next step once the surveys are done.
Thank you.
And there'll be subsequent requests, which you can see in the capital plan and out years for the final design and then ultimately the construction. So we kind of take all these in 3 steps. We do the survey and preliminary design, the final design, and then the construction, and we're able to refine the numbers as we advance through each one of those steps.
Do you think you will be ready to have the requests for construction for fiscal 26, maybe?
That's our goal. Yeah. So I mean,
Okay.
the submission that we've submitted this year takes into account a number of things. Actually, we sat down and we did a good review of our bandwidth, frankly, acknowledging some real personnel concerns that we have right now. Right. We have a hard time hiring new engineers. So that actually limits the amount of work that we can get done, right? So we took some of that into account, right? As well as identifying our priorities. So that's, with the two big projects that we have submitted this year, they're the 2 highest priority projects, frankly, we have in the program. So installing that sewer in 28 allows us to branch out into the remainder of the program. Upgrading the wastewater treatment plant significantly reduces our nitrogen load in the Lewis Bay watershed and allows us to do everything else, right? So, so we kind of reprioritize things as we go along, and the core of the CWMP is to be adaptive. It's designed to be an adaptive plan. It's designed to be a malleable plan, and we continue to do that each year in order to make sure that we do this as efficiently and as successfully for the community as we can.
Sure. Now, I know that we were doing a aquaculture feasibility study. Where do we stand on that one?
Yeah, so last year we received funding. I forget exactly what the number was. The dollar figures were for that.
I think it's like 150,000 or something.
I think it was $150,000 too.
Yeah.
That sounds about right. It was a feasibility study for aquaculture in Warren's Cove, so in the upper reaches of the 3 bays. That has not started yet. We're in the process of developing the RFP to retain a consultant to assist us with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Griffin, do you have an estimate or maybe even exact numbers? Last year's numbers were $101 million, that of this year $170 million. of that 70 or 69 million, about how much of that is scope increase, such as the extra miles along the Route 28?
Sure.
How much would you estimate is construction inflation?
Yeah, so I don't have exact numbers. It's really hard to actually put exact numbers on that, right?
Yeah.
My gut tells me it's probably 50-50 scope increase and the other 50% being just real changes in the construction market.
Thanks.
Jim, Hector, any questions?
No, I'm good so far.
Okay, that was a good segue into the next question, actually. So if we don't have any other questions, I'll move on to the next one.
Thank
The
you.
next question was CWMP request for fiscal year 25 through 28 has increased 62% from 260 million in last year's submission to 421 million in the most recent submission. What caused such a major increase, and how much of this was estimation error, scope change, et cetera? So we just kind of talked about the last part of that.
Yep.
Just for clarification purposes, $260 million was the FY25 through FY28 requests. In the FY24 budget request, 421, it's actually 431, I think that might have just been a typo, was the request in this year's budget, but that was actually for the 5 years, not for FY25 through 28. It actually was $385 million. Still a lot of money, and still a significant increase, but just for clarification purposes, I think the increase is actually like 48%, when I did the math out. So it's a lot of what we talked about. The same things we just discussed. It's you know, the increase in the construction market, some increase in scope, and we did also add a project, which we'll talk about with one of the next questions, which was the phase 2 of the water pollution control facility upgrades. And we'll get to that one with one of the questions coming up. So,
Okay.
all right, the next question is relative to Park City Wind. So I'll just read the question and then I'll do my best to answer it. The November 2023 Park City Wind LLC filing with the town and the Commonwealth's Energy Facility Siting Board outlines some Park City Wind project changes. Again, this isn't me, this is the question. Have these changes impacted DPW's sewer installation schedule, and have these changes resulted in increased DPW budget requests? If so, how much? And to what extent, if any, have CWMP plans and spending resulted in a crowding out of other DPW priorities and projects? So I'm going to take these questions and actually reverse. So the last question was based, as I interpret it, basically, to what extent have the changes in the CWMP plan or the CWMP plan in general impacted other DPW projects? I interpret that as general fund projects, right? They really don't. So the only reason they do is from a bandwidth and personnel perspective, as I was alluding to earlier, we only have so many people here, right? So there is an overlap in the work that's being completed by folks in our office. So to that extent, there are some throughput changes, but as far as what we submit, we identify the capital needs of the community with this process, and we submit them accordingly. So we don't really change that submission as a result of what's going on with the CWMP. We identify what we feel are issues and items that need to be addressed, and we let the process play out. The first question was specifically, how does the Park City Wind project changes, potential project changes, how are these impacting DPW's schedule? And if so, how? And are there any changes in budget requests? So back to my earlier conversation, the CWMP is intended to be adaptive, right? In fact, we adapted the plan as a result of Park City Wind once already, right? So when the Park City Wind project was proposed and started permitting, we actually expedited a portion of the route, which was identified in phase 2, in order to more or less partner with the project. Now, with potential delays and frankly uncertainty with the project, DPW has made a recommendation to consider phasing the sewer expansion along the Park City Wind route. This is actually something that's being discussed at the council now. There was a first read for it at last council meeting, and there's an anticipated vote at the next meeting. And basically what we're looking at is phasing the project, which would be we would proceed on schedule this fall with the northern half of the project, effectively Shoot Flying Hill Road, and a section of Route 28, which is actually a section of the Route 28 West project, incidentally enough, in order to continue progress and to leverage SRF dollars and associated principal subsidies. So the changes have resulted in changes, right? So the changes to Park City Wind, the uncertainty surrounding Park City Wind, has resulted in some changes, but we purposely prepare ourselves for this potential at all times, and try to make sure that we're ready to be adaptive. And again, that's the core of the program, is to be able to adapt, to take advantage of any opportunities or situations that we need to adapt to. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope I did the best I could to answer the question. Any follow-ups on that?
I've got a couple of follow-ups.
Sure.
From a design perspective, are there any, are you able to charge back, or I'm not sure the right legal term, to Park City for unexpected changes like that? In other words, if their permitting process doesn't go through and you scaled, so the general thought is, are they liable for any of those changes?
Not that I'm aware of, but that wouldn't necessarily be a technical question for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just.
All the design that we have done to date will be leveraged. It's just a matter of it, you know, the southern half of the project may happen at a different time, right? So we have designed the project that such that it could be done independently, or it could be done in coordination with the Park City Wind project. So
I did see Dan's presentation last week, which was awesome. And as a resident of Main Street on the southern half of Centerville, I'm very appreciative. However, I did, just for curiosity, the route did seem a little shorter than the proposed 30.9 million for the extended route. Was there, is that, could you explain the same pricing for a smaller, what I just quickly viewed as a smaller project without?
yeah, so totally understand the question, because it is actually a shorter length of sewer that's being installed. However, the portion of the project that I'll say substituted, right, which is basically Route 28 from Finney's Lane to Old Stage, is a much larger sewer because it's going to convey all the wastewater from the western part of town, and it's going to be a fairly deep sewer. So it's a fairly expensive but high priority piece of infrastructure for us to install. So, and working in a state highway is naturally more expensive than in a town road, because the state has additional requirements and additional paving thicknesses and stuff like that. That results in it being more costly. So ultimately, when we sat down and did the numbers, it really just worked out that it was a similar price.
Any other questions of this before Griffin moves on?
Nope.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll keep moving on. The next one isn't really a question, but 100% agree with the statement, and we complete our plan based off this. So the statement was the most important criterion should be to target CWMP capital spending to those areas of Barnstable that demonstrate the greatest need, and we completely agree. The two projects that we're submitting this year are frankly the two highest priority remaining projects in phase one, with the next highest priority and maybe equally priority being our effluent disposal improvements. So the largest need watersheds in our community are the ones in the western part of town. The Route 28 West project will get sewer out to the western part of town, so that it kind of puts that check in the box. And then without the nitrogen improvements at water pollution control, we really can't do the rest of the program. So 100%, I think our submissions are consistent with this criterion.
So Griffin, I think we've talked about this before, but when you say the western part of town, you're talking about, you're implying or capturing the entire 30-year, 3 phases of the project, including running, trying to reduce some of the flow in the 3 bays area.
Yeah, so when I refer to the western part of town, I'm referring to the 3 bays watershed as well as the Pompanesett Bay watershed.
Right.
So basically, the western part of the town, there's significant progress needed in order to achieve the TMDLs out there. So
right. So the first phase of getting out to the western part of town is doing the Route 28 West project, and that'll be finished by 2030, something like that.
2027 is the prediction right now.
To Route 149.
That's correct.
And then in phase 2, just give an overview of what happens in phase 2.
Yeah, so actually, Route 28 West basically brings us through a little bit more than half of phase 1, right? So we're out in the 3 bays watershed halfway through phase 1, which is significant progress. After that, we actually have other projects that branch out into the 3 bays watershed and start to actually collect significant flow in neighborhoods. Projects such as the Prince Cove project and the Osterville Woods project and South County Road project. These projects are starting to collect flow in the 3 bays watershed, as well as other projects that we're doing, I guess we'll call it more towards the east of the town in the Centerville River watershed that are also removing nutrients from that watershed. So we're really starting to make significant progress in those 2 watersheds. We add in the plant upgrades, and we're doing a lot in all Lewis Bay, Centerville River, and 3 bays watershed. In phase 2, we just continue to branch out in all 3 of those watersheds into the neighborhoods.
Branch out north and south of Route
North
128.
and south, as well as further west as well, right? So we can't stop at 149. We got to keep going out into the Pompanesett Bay watershed, and so that would be one of the tasks in phase 2 would be to start sewering out there or implementing solutions out there, right?
Right.
And then in phase 3, and if I had the map, I could show it better. But the northwestern part of the town, up in the mills, not quite up in West Barnstable, but mostly the mills. We've identified that in phase 3 as it's the most rural and less dense areas of the plan. So it's the least cost-effective way to sewer properties, because density is the most cost-effective way to sewer. Because every length of pipe is expensive, right? So the goal being that the various non-traditional solutions that we're implementing in the plan, Lillian referred to one of them, which was the aquaculture project. We also have the mill pond project that we're hoping to mill pond dredging that we're hoping will be a success as well. Any impact that those have, we would look to scale back sewer expansion in phase 3 to the extent we can and still achieve TMDL. So that's the way the program's designed. But putting in the backbone down Route 28 really allows us to do everything else.
Right. So what was behind that question, and that's a question that I put in last year's CIP report that CFAC delivered to town council, is we know some people who live out in Katuitt, and one woman in particular swims or rows in one of those bays almost every day, year round. So obviously she wears a wetsuit in the wintertime. But but she, and I've heard this from other people in Katuitt, that, because of the time lag in getting out to quote unquote the western part of town, some people have said, by the time CWMP gets here, these bays are going to be dead. And that was sort of a strong statement. So I think when you and I talked about this on the phone a few months ago, I sort of indicated that we needed to prioritize the move out to the western part of town. I think what you're saying is that DPW is prioritizing that.
Absolutely, it's one of the core priorities of the CWMP in the early phases.
The CWMP is, in fact, a prioritization based on need primarily.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, we just can't do everything at once. So something
Right.
has to come after something else.
Right.
And given the size of this project and the cost of this project and
Mhm.
the time frame needed to do this level of construction, it just takes. I mean, we had originally, I'm sure you've heard this, our original plan was 60 years.
Right.
And it was cut in half to 30 years, frankly, arbitrarily. And that's what we're trying to accomplish now. So someone's going to be last, unfortunately. And
Yeah. Yeah, but
Yeah, and frankly, geography dictates that, right? So our infrastructure is here at the water pollution control facility in Hyannis, and we got to bring it all the way out to basically the western part of town. And so getting out there just takes time, and that's
Right.
that's the reality of the construction.
right. And Dan, you mentioned the cut in time from 60 years to 30 years. Was that a result of the Conservation Law Foundation pressures, or what in broad brush, what catalyzed moving from 60 years to 30 years?
I don't have a lot of detail, but it was town council direction.
Uh-huh.
Not sure on what input that was based on, but
Okay.
after the Water Resources Advisory Committee did its work, we developed a plan for 60 years and presented it.
Right.
It was requested that we cut it in half, which we
Right.
did.
Right. Okay. Well, that I think Griffin and Dan, you guys have done a good job answering my questions so far. Keep going.
All right, great. All right, the next question I think is also is wind project related, and it's explain the cost savings and efficiencies, claiming that town in planning sewer routes seeks to leverage the opportunity to realize cost savings and efficiencies associated with installing the sewers in coordination with power cable conduits. What exactly are those cost savings and efficiencies, and what do they amount to in dollars? So as far as cost savings go, having gone through one project at this point and planning for a second, the cost savings we're seeing really are related to paving, right? So ultimately, under the host community agreement for Vineyard Wind was responsible for paving of the roads. We've done some estimates for the second project, for the Park City Wind project. For instance, the Chute Flying Hill Road section from Service Road to 28 is anticipated to be about $1 million in paving. So if you look at the whole route, it's about double that. So call it $2 to $2.5 million in paving, is what our expenses would be to pave those roadways. Those are the biggest savings from a cost perspective. There are other more difficult to quantify efficiencies associated with it. And it really comes down to, and they're really technical in nature, frankly. And I say we, but the two projects would be putting a lot of infrastructure in the ground all at the same time, and really utilizing effectively the whole corridor of these roadways. And that really needs to be coordinated, or else it just will not be able to be achieved. So the coordination of the two designs is imperative in order to make sure that there's enough physical space to do both efforts, right? So that's, 3, 4, 5 years back when we were talking about Vineyard Wind, that was what we identified right from the jump. Was we absolutely need to coordinate the sewer design, because the duct banks that are installed are so large. It would be difficult to, potentially impossible, to install the sewer infrastructure after they're in the ground, and certainly more costly to do so, if nothing else. So we have prioritized the need to install the sewers before the duct banks along all these routes, so that we have a clean sheet to work off of. We coordinate the design such that everybody has their own, we call it utility corridor. So sewers go in here, the duct banks go in here, and any other improvements that need to happen are going in other coordinated locations. And that allows for a successful project and minimizes unknowns during construction, which unknowns during construction result in significant dollars. So that's really where the efficiencies come from. They are very technical in nature, and they're hard to quantify. But as far as as dollar signs that you can put your finger on, it's really paving. And again, it's to the tune of $2 million along the Park City Wind route.
2 million. You had said in the past it's $1 million a mile for paving.
Yeah, so basically the Shoe Flying Hill Road section, I did a recent estimate on this, and that's why I just go back to it, because I did it as part of the appropriation request that's before the council right now. Was like $990,000 is what we came up with for the estimate for that section of road. And then there's basically an equal amount of road to the south of that along the route. So call it $2 million roughly for that route.
Okay.
And it also depends on the extent of the repair. So
Right.
for example, Craigville Beach Road was so torn up that we required that they basically reconstruct the road, which is far more expensive than simply just grinding and paving, which we would normally do after a trench for a water line installation or even a sewer line installation. But the duct bank is so large, it disrupts so much of the road base that we have to reconstruct. And so that makes it far more costly and thus far much more saved for the town in that situation.
So the reconstruction is more than paving.
Yes, because we have to actually build the base.
Right.
You know, a proper road construction is several layers.
Right.
You know, it's a base and it's compacted, and then there's a sublayer and a what's the word, Griffin?
Yeah, there's a binder course and
Preliminary.
then a wearing course. So basically what happened on Craigville Beach Road is the number of trenches that were overlapping each other. It's difficult to have that number of intersecting trenches and then go through and just mill it, which is when you basically just grind the upper layer of pavement for about 1.5 inches. At that point, because of the amount of construction that occurred there, it was very clear to us that that was not going to be a successful solution. And so we pushed Vineyard Wind in that case to reclaim the road, which basically pulverizes all the pavement down to the base and rebuilds the whole roadway.
And Vineyard Wind LLC picked up those costs?
That's right. Yes. Yes.
And that's because of the language in the host community agreement that says they need to put the road back basically the way they found it.
Yeah, so we
Right.
basically identified that was the suitable solution to put it back to a like new condition. We had some back and forth and ultimately landed on that was how the road was going to be repaired.
So it's fair to say that the cost, Vineyard Wind's cost for those were more than $990,000 a mile.
Well, it's not 990,000 a mile. It's 990,000 for that stretch of Shoe Flying Hill Road, which is actually a little over a mile. But
Right. Well,
yes
the
and
$1
no.
million
So when
a mile, the $1 million a mile for the repaving in the
Now
case
that's a
of,
reconstruction cost, I think, right?
yeah, it's not $1 million a mile. It's less than that. But the overall project. So if we're just talking about Park City Wind, for instance, the overall
Right.
paving cost, our
Right.
paving cost as a municipal job, which is how we
Right.
bid it, which is how we
Right.
estimated it, would be about $2 to $2.5 million. Private companies can save some money when they do this type of work. They may not necessarily pay all the same. They may not pay the same costs that we do, so it may be more cost effective for private companies in some cases to do the work, and that's just a result of Massachusetts procurement laws and prevailing wage and so on and so forth. In their case, they pay prevailing wage, but so it may be a little bit cheaper for them to do the work than for us to do the work, I guess is what I'm getting at. But yes, in general, on that stretch of road in particular that Dan's referring to, that was far more costly than our normal mill and paving that we would have typically done if we were just doing a sewer project there.
Okay, and Dan, you said that the Vineyard Wind, Craigville Beach Road, that was reclamation of the road, and that was roughly $1 million a mile. But if all they had to
Guess
do
what I
was
was saying when
yeah,
that term that's been used or that number $1 million a mile, that's
Right.
for a full depth reclamation.
okay,
Generally, if you want a kind of a rule of thumb,
right,
there's lots of variables, particularly if
Right.
there's drainage involved.
Mhm.
But if you're just doing a mill or grinding and paving, that would not be the cost per mile, it would be.
Okay, it'd be less.
It'd be
Oh.
more, approximately half that. I mean,
Okay, okay.
the Park City Wind route's approximately 5 miles. We're thinking it's approximately $2.5 million, our cost to mill and pave it. So let's say
Okay.
it's roughly $500,000 a mile.
Okay, all right. I've beaten this one to death. Keep going.
It's quite all right. That's what we're here for.
Let me just ask you, just this curiosity question. What would have, so you get, Dan's topic gets voted in next week where we talk about doing the North project, and lo and behold, you're firmly entrenched and off and running on that section. And Park City Wind gets their permitting for the south section, right, coming up through Main Street. How would you adjust to that? Would you be able to be nimble enough where you could then go back and put the sewer lines before them, or in fact, would you be trailing their their trenching?
We would not be in a situation where we'd be trailing them. So we're continuing with the design of the southern half of the project, right? And
Okay.
effectively at this point, we're preparing 2 bid documents such that we're ready to put the southern half out to bid when Park City Wind's ready to start construction, if it proceeds like that. We will need to appropriate additional funds for the southern half to do that work. But as I alluded to earlier, we're kind of taking a section of the Route 28 West project and expediting it. And it was effectively the same cost as that southern half. So
Yeah.
really, it's not an increase in cost. It's just shifting it from one project to another.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks, Griffin.
Yep.
I have a question. So as the 28 West and the Chute Flying Hill northern part, when we put in our duck banks, are we paying for those duck banks?
They're not our duck banks. They're private duck banks.
Those are the power cables.
Are those the power cables?
Yes.
Yes.
This is
Thermal-
before, this is,
Ther- Go ahead, sorry.
this is before Park City Wind comes in?
Right. So they're different terminology, I guess. So
Yeah,
the work that we'll be doing is to install the sewer pipes, right?
okay,
And then eventually Park City Wind will install their electrical duct banks in the roadway, right?
Okay.
So the work that we do is the sewer pipes and the sewer infrastructure. Those are what are included in our requests. The electrical duct banks are what conveys the electricity back and forth from the wind turbines offshore. That's their infrastructure that they would be installing separately.
So if we're putting in the sewer lines, are we repaving while we go?
We will be installing temporary paving during that construction. And if Park City Wind does not happen or does not happen on a reasonable time frame, such that the temporary paving will not stand up for that amount of time, we'll have to make a decision to pave the road more permanently or not. But I would certainly recommend paving it permanently at that point.
Yeah,
What we're really kind of hedging as a bet, I guess, would be
yeah, that's what
that
it looks like.
it's gonna take 18 to 24 months for us to construct this northern solution. If Park City Wind doesn't start construction within that time frame, then we have to adapt to that. If they do, then everything kind of goes as it would have anyway.
Right, got it, thank you. So this is basically that temporary fix is in anticipation that Park City Wind will get a permit and will help us with the repaving.
That's how we've priced the project to date. So
Okay,
we haven't included the cost of paving the roadways
Right,
that are along the
right.
duck bank route.
thank you.
All right, back to the questions. I think I only have 2 more, so I will try to get through these. It appears that 3 sewer sections, Osterville Woods, Chute Flying Hill Road, and Old Craigville, have been slipped out in time past 2028. They were to add about 1,000 parcel sewer connections. Is this correct? And are these sewer connections still in phase 1? And if so, when and at what cost? So I think I alluded to this earlier. All three of these projects are still in the plan. They're still in phase one. They were shifted out a couple of years for the reasons we discussed earlier. Basically, it was prioritization as well as financial considerations, as well as bandwidth considerations, as for the reason why we moved some of them out. Some of them, most notably the Shoot Flying Hill Road project, is not named that anymore. It was combined with the Great Marsh Road project. So you'll see that called the Great Marsh Road project, but these are all still in the program. Any questions on that?
That's good so far for me. Neil?
Yeah, that appreciate the clarification. It wasn't
Okay.
clear because the plan just stops.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's so with the CIP, we just submit the 5 years, right? So if
Yeah.
anything gets pushed out, we have a 30-year plan. So there's a lot actually that's in the plan that's not in the 5-year CIP. So certainly we could sit down and go through that. And I could bore you to death with our plans for year beyond 5 years. So
No, appreciate the clarification.
awesome.
You skipped B.
Yeah.
That
So I'm
you?
coming back to that one because it's kind of a completely different topic, right?
Yeah.
So that's relative to the RO and UV plant. Is that the one that you're referring to?
Yes, sir.
Yes. So the question is, in this year's CWMP addition of a $64 million RO UV plant in 2027, the questions are, is this a proposed and needed CWMP project expense? Is this meant as an option and something that might also be allocated to water supply, or is this something else? So this project is a project that we have started to conceptualize, really weighing a number of considerations that affect not only the CWMP, but water resources as a whole in town, right? So we are in some conversations with regulators, most notably DEP. We are expecting at some point in the future, we don't know when, that they will be looking to regulate the water pollution control facility for PFAS and potentially other contaminants of emerging concern. Right now, there's really only two tried and true ways to deal with PFAS. One is granular activated carbon. That's what we do at our water supply plants. And the other is reverse osmosis, which is effectively the state-of-the-art technology for water treatment. It's the highest quality you can get to. It's effectively the limit of technology. And it effectively gives you distilled water, right? GAC really only deals with some issues, PFAS being one of them, and GAC's granular activated carbon. It doesn't deal with anything else that may occur in the future, right? And it doesn't deal with all CECs that we know about today, contaminants of emerging concern that we know about today. So in thinking about that, when you weigh the two technologies, one's certainly more expensive, that would be reverse osmosis, but it also provides more opportunity, and more opportunity on a number of fronts. So the next concern that we have is our effluent disposal. We are going to need to increase the capacity of our effluent disposal, really to deal with predicted down gradient mounding of groundwater, which is the increase in the groundwater table. So we have to find a solution to that in order to increase our capacity at our plant. We're continuing to work those issues, but every time we go through that, there are hurdles with putting water into the ground in this community. One of the biggest one is a lot of the community is water supply. The majority of the community is within water supply, right? And if you're going to put treated effluent into the ground within a water supply recharge area, it needs to be at a high treatment level. So again, coming back to, let's bring it to the highest treatment as possible, right? And when you start looking at the numbers and the costs associated with treating to this level, it really gets to the point where the water at that point is effectively distilled water, and at that point it becomes a commodity because it's something that can be used for any number of opportunities, right? And this is done in other parts of the country. So in places like California and Colorado, where they have water supply concerns, really because they don't have enough water. In this case, we actually have more water than we know what to do with. So it's almost a reverse issue, right? So this project is not something that we're actively saying is going to happen. This is a project that may be a solution to a number of our concerns that we have, water resources related. And one of the hurdles that exists right now is there actually isn't any regulatory framework for potable reuse of water, which would be either putting it in the ground and then withdrawing it and using it, which frankly we already do, because all the water we put into the ground ends up in the groundwater, and that's where we pull our water from, right? But there's no regulatory framework to say that that's what our solution is going to be. And there's no regulatory framework for just connecting pipes, which frankly, there is the opportunity to do that with reverse osmosis. We're not suggesting that's what we're going to do, but there is that opportunity, right? So we're starting to have these regulatory discussions with the state regulators to see if this is an issue that we can work through. And this project was really the result of that. And so we wanted to put some numbers to this potential project so that, one, it's programmed, right? But two, it could actually, in the long run, save money on other issues. One of the projects we have on here that's listed as a TBD is our effluent disposal. This could be the effluent disposal solution, right? In addition, you know, both the Hyannis water system and the Calm water system and Barnstable water system have are all actively looking for additional water supply for a number of reasons, whether it be contamination or redundancy concerns or other needs. And this is another potential source of water. So treating it as as a commodity was really the intent of presenting this project and including this. We don't know, frankly, if we will even be able to do this project with the regulatory framework that exists. We don't ultimately know if this will be the solution, but we wanted to include it into the plan because it's something we're actively thinking about and we're actively starting to work on as a potential solution to, you know, all these issues that we have in the community. So that's what this project is. Any questions on that?
No, thank you for clarifying that. That makes sense what you're saying. It's not you're flagging this as an opportunity, not necessarily, you know, I was simply looking at it as, you know, another $60 million on top of the other 60 million, you know,
Right.
there may be a limit at some point in time.
Of course. And the reason, frankly, we put it in there was so that if we brought it forward in 27, it wasn't, where did this 60 million come from? We wanted to get out ahead of it, right? It's in the plan at this point. And it may be something that we do, and it may be the solution to some of the other issues that we have to deal with through the program anyway.
I think it's
You
a good
remember-
idea to put it in front of the town so they've heard of this before. If they ever come up with PFAS and all this other stuff, I guess PFAS is going to happen. It's just not clear when.
Right.
Do you remember where you had that ranked? How did you rank that in your priorities?
It's actually, it's submitted as phase 2 of the water pollution control improvement project. So
Yeah,
it's the
okay.
number 1 project, but we have a request in fiscal year 25, the 109 million. And then there's another programmed request in 27 under the same project, which is the one that we just talked about. So it's not a separate project. That's just how we structured the submission. So it's basically 2 phases of one project is how we structured it.
So, so that's a great explanation for this 64 million reverse osmosis plant. You've
Make
put
it the
down
$64
fiscal
million
year.
question.
You put down, yes, you put down fiscal year 2027 is when current thinking is that you would have to appropriate this, or town council Craig and his colleagues would have to appropriate this. When are you going to have? Probably you can't answer this, but when do you think you'll have more certainty as to whether this would go forward and actually in what fiscal year?
Right. So we are meeting monthly with DEP on this issue as this grand issue that we have, which is, you know, what do we do with the water that we need to treat, right?
Right.
We actually met with them this morning. So we meet every month to continue this issue. We have no illusions that this will be easy or that it will be fast. So I personally think the 2027 is probably an optimistic view of it.
Right.
But that's where we programmed it as kind of maybe the earliest opportunity for this to come into play. And basically it was right after we would be done with the nitrogen project, we would roll right into this upgrade was the thinking, but I think it's an optimistic approach.
Okay, great. Thank you for that answer.
Do any of the other members have questions or comments about what Griffin has been talking about?
Chris, you've been notably quiet.
And I think
Just
it's
listening.
Jackie is here also.
I was thinking about the reverse osmosis and how it compares with the plants that are trying to remove the PFAS. And so I was wondering if both are equal, or if one is better than, how do they rate each project, and what would it actually do for the system? I was just thinking.
Yeah, so I think what your question is, the two technologies that I talked about that can remove PFAS, the granular activated carbon and the reverse
Right.
osmosis. Is that the basis of your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
How do they both support or differ from each other? And would you, if you were to only have one option, which would it be? Or are both supportive of each other? I was just thinking.
It's a great question. So I'll geek out a little bit and just explain what both technologies are, and then I'll kind of pull it back to the question, right? So granular activated carbon is an adsorption technology. So what that means is effectively the constituent you're trying to remove, in this case PFAS, sticks to it, right? And that's how it removes it. So you pull water through this treatment system, the PFAS sticks to it, and once it sticks to it too much, you either need to replace it or replace the media, and you continue to do that over time, but it basically removes all the PFAS to no detect levels. And that's what we do in our water supply, all our water supplies in the Hyannis water system, is we treat to remove PFAS to no detect right now. That is an option. It does not, granular activated carbon does not remove everything. There are only certain CECs, contaminants of emerging concern, that GAC does remove. One of the CECs that we have in our water supply, for instance, in certain wells, is called 1,4-dioxane. It's a hydrocarbon CEC. GAC doesn't remove it. So at our Mahar water treatment plant, for instance, we had to install what's called advanced UV oxidation in order to get rid of that constituent. The benefit of reverse osmosis is it's a membrane that's so fine that it effectively pulls basically water atoms, water molecules through the membrane, and that's about all that comes through it, to the point where all the salts are removed and it's effectively just distilled water. So the benefit of reverse osmosis is that things that we don't know about right now, in theory, are removed, right? So things that we aren't aware that are harmful, that could be in the water supply in the future. The next PFAS to, we call them contaminants of emerging concern for a reason, because we don't know about them right now. They theoretically are already handled with that technology. So in addition, in places where reuse is a real thing, such as and is happening, such as California, such as Colorado, such as Singapore, where they do a lot of this. This is the technology they use. This is the type of treatment system that you see to reuse water in these capacities. It's also what you would see like on the space shuttle, for instance. They would use this technology to be able to, drink water that is basically wastewater, and it goes straight through a reverse osmosis system. So it's basically the state-of-the-art technology in this industry.
Okay, but these hydrocarbons that are put through the system, are they safe? Or how safe are they?
Right. So there's not hydrocarbons that are being put through the system in either one of these. There are in every water supply, there are things that you pump, right? And that come into the water supply, whether it's PFAS or whether it's magnesium or iron. There are things that are not desirable to be in the water supply or that are regulated that have to be removed from the water supply. When we supply drinking water, we're required to make sure that they are below thresholds that we're required to make sure
So
they're below. So we treat
They're
all of
below,
those
they're
that they are.
below thresholds.
They're all, yeah.
But there is an element of we don't
Well,
necessarily.
It depends upon what constituent you're discussing. But in some cases, they're below thresholds that have been
Okay.
established and proven to or determined to be safe. In some cases, they're zero or they're non-detect.
Okay, thank you.
Are the costs of the granulated carbon and reverse osmosis comparable?
No. So reverse osmosis is certainly more expensive.
Uh-huh.
And it's more expensive in from an operating cost as well.
Oh.
So it's definitely an investment, but the opportunities that present themselves are what needs to be weighed in that decision, right? So and that's why I say it's not a decision that's made. It's an opportunity that has presented itself to deal with the number of things that we're trying to juggle when we're trying to manage water resources in the community.
Thank you for bringing that up. It alerts us to keep an eye on it.
Griffin, one other question. You mentioned in the granular activated carbon that the PFAS sticks to the carbon, I guess it is, right?
Yeah.
How does one dispose of the carbon with a PFAS on it? What do you do with it?
Yeah, so it gets taken out of the vessels, put on a truck, and brought to a facility where they incinerate it. And it gets incinerated to a certain temperature that it deactivates the PFAS.
Okay.
And then in our case, we actually get the carbon back and we truck it back to our facilities and we reuse the same carbon. But they incinerate it to get rid of the PFAS. And you have to do it at the right temperature, or else you actually create different constituents of PFAS. And so there's facilities that do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions on it? Have we completed all the questions?
We have completed the questions. So
Hey,
I think I missed the answer to one of them.
Okay.
The second question on the first page was referred to fiscal year 24. There was a $55 million request from DPW, and that dropped to 26 million in this CIP. And I was just wondering, can you explain how did you do that magic of actually reducing cost?
So the requests really aren't reduced, and actually it goes back to Dan's conversation at the beginning where he went through all the projects that were identified as not resubmitted. They actually were just moved to different years. And so what we did this year, traditionally what we've done is we've just submitted all the projects in the 1 to 2 year time frame, and it was very light in the 3 to 5 year time frame. So this year we actually sat down and looked at the full 5 years and said, okay, looking at not only priorities, but also, I'm going to use the bandwidth word again, the reality of pushing through all the projects, right? We slotted the projects where we felt they were most appropriately slotted, rather than put everything in FY25 and see which ones stick. We said, we're going to spread them out such that it's a more realistic plan, I guess would be the way I'd put it.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't capture all that earlier. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you very much for giving us such detailed discussions of all these projects and our questions. It certainly increased our understanding of it.
So we're about an hour and a half in. What I also asked, and it's up to you, how do you want to proceed? I've asked Mark, the architect, and Griffin to go through their top 10 submissions in order of the priority in which we submitted them. If you'd like us to continue, we can do that. Or
I think that would be helpful. Neil, how do you feel?
That would be very great. Now, I received a request from the CIP subcommittee of CFAC, and they really wanted to have a discussion of the water pollution control and water supply separately. But you have already covered a lot of it, so I need to ask the members of the subcommittee if you want a separate discussion at another meeting before we proceed.
Yes, I
Oh,
think just a few questions would be, there were a couple, actually, it was mostly water pollution control, I believe, or excuse me, water supply, that's got like a $40 million project, and I think we just want to understand that, because that went up by about 50% in cost, and again, it's a scope versus inflation question. So
So
that's,
So if we could plan to have those issues discussed at our next meeting, which is February 12th, pending your availability at DPW, that would be great. But yes, we would love to have you discuss your top priorities.
Okay, so I'll give Griffin a rest to his voice and
Thank you, Griffin.
switch over to Mark Marinaccio, who's the town architect, and he basically deals primarily with our vertical projects, which are our building projects, remodeling, mechanical systems, things like that. So, Mark.
Thank you. Mark Marinaccio, Town Architect, Public Works. This project is number 2 on a 57 that we submitted this year. It was the Town Hall elevator replacement. So we're right now in the process of completing the mechanical improvement documents to go out to bid for that building. And as part of that, we had an elevator company come in, Siska Hennessy Group, who specialize in elevators, to do an analysis on this elevator. We expected the outcome of that report to be the same as what we ran into at SAB. Both elevators are about the same era. Both of them are piston elevators. Piston elevators installed back in the mid-80s were just basically the pistons were installed in the ground. You cannot inspect them. Their recommendation was to replace this based on the age and based on the fact that you cannot inspect those pistons. If those pistons fail, the elevator fails. And so this was one of the top priorities for me. One of our top priorities is to replace that elevator.
How many elevators are we replacing?
This is one elevator in Town Hall. I already have funding for the school administration building elevator replacement, which is in design right now.
Thank you.
Well, the next one is the number 3 on a 57, which was installation of additional columbariums at the Mosswood Cemetery. Right now, there are 3 existing columbariums. When we submitted this last year, they were 90% full. So there is a need for additional columbariums. We have a master plan that would allow 11 columbariums there. So we're proposing this year to add 4 more, which will give us additional, each one containing 32 niches, and that gives a total of 128 new burial locations.
Is any of this funded through the TFAC?
Well, I'm not sure how the funding would be
Yeah, because
put forward by, but maybe Gareth would know that.
Yeah, I think your question is related to the Trust Fund Advisory Committee, so you're
Right,
looking
right.
for Kirkland funding. I believe discussions have been had to submit that one to Kirkwood, but whether or not it would be approved, only time would tell.
Yeah, the reason I ask it is I happen to be a member of that TFAC, and we have talked about funding the columbarium. So I was just curious about where all this money was coming from.
Yeah, I think you'll find that a request would be coming forward.
Okay. We'll wait for it then.
In a good word.
The next capital improvement was number 6 on the 57, a school administration building mechanical upgrades. This continues the upgrade work to the mechanical systems we are working on and have completed at the school administration building. Right now, recently, like last year, we completed the upgrade to the mechanical head end equipment, including the boilers and the fire suppression system and all the equipment down in the basement. This now project we are now working on the designs to take all of that and move that and distribute out throughout the building. And the last piece of this puzzle was to install a on-demand generator for the building. As part of the project, we are also consolidating town offices from 200 Main Street. And so we're putting the building department, the health department, conservation's in the building, along with school administration and HR. And so there's more of a demand of the use on this building, that if this building goes down without power, a lot of resources and a lot of office workers are without power. So we set that as a priority for that building based on all that's happening there. Next capital improvement request was number 8 on 57. It was mechanical improvements to the MEA building. So the MEA building has 2 systems in it. One is more recent than the other. Talking to our mechanical techs, well, really this came from Structures and Grounds as a request, saying that those heating units in the attic over there at MEA are kind of on their last legs and need to be replaced. Next capital improvement is number 9 out of 57. It's the improvements to the Barnstable Adult Community Center mechanical upgrades. Again, this came from Structures and Grounds as a request based on the age of the units and the difficulty to get replacement parts. We're proposing to replace those gas-fired furnaces with a variable refrigerant flow VRF electric heating system in that building, and modifying the ductwork for that, which would be much more energy effective.
So all of these so far are, with the exception of the columbarium, are sort of infrastructure type projects.
Yeah, we always look at buildings from my perspective as life safety being number 1, hence the elevator. And then moving to exterior envelope, making sure they're watertight, and then improving mechanical systems.
Okay, thank you.
The next one was number 9 out of 57. It's, I'm sorry, number 10 out of 57, which was the Central Recreation Building mechanical improvements. That has an old steam heat system. We just recently completed renovating the restrooms in there on the first floor and combining the 2 open spaces. During that process, we had to modify some of the old steam heat cast iron baseboard. And basically we were doing everything we could to find parts for that. And so this basically replaces all of that with a new forced hot air system. Because of the forced hot air system, we would include air conditioning in the building, which would make the building much more usable in the summer months. And also replacing the makeup air system in the attic, which was defunct a number of years ago.
Okay, any questions so far? Okay, next.
Number 13 out of 57 is the handicapped access ramp to the old Selectmen's building. We're proposing a handicap ramp onto the building. Basically, there's activities that happen in the building that is open to the public, and there's no handicapped accessibility to the building, which is an ADA violation, which is a federal law for civil rights. And so we're proposing a ramp be added onto the front, which would be a wooden ramp that could be removed to the building, so it wouldn't affect the historic value of the building. And we believe that much of this could be funded through CPC.
Okay,
Number 16 out of 57 is the Cape Cod Airfield hangar repair. This building is now 100 years old. So it is now eligible for community preservation funds. It's an existing hangar from the 20s, and it needs a new roof, it needs new siding. There's a lot of structural corrosion on the inside, and it's a piece of infrastructure that needs to be upgraded.
okay,
And number 17 out of 57 for capital improvement requests is Mosswood Cemetery building improvements. Right now, the Mosswood Cemetery has a small restroom that is not handicapped accessible. It also has a front door that has steps, which is not handicapped accessible. So this proposal adds an addition onto the left side of the Cape to add a handicap ramp and a handicap restroom and a little entry space, as well as on the back, small locker area for staff.
Thank you.
And number 23 of 57 is Bismarck Park improvements, the design for this. This ties in with the work that's being done to replace the bulkhead. I'm sure Griffin may talk about, but this was to get some design money so that planning and development could move forward with design for the site to replace the shanties and the walkway that's failing, as well as look at how pedestrian access to the waterfront works with, what's happening there for the commercial ships and boating.
Hmm.
And those are the 10 that I have.
Does anybody have any questions of Mark?
I just have a quick thought, but first comment on the CIP task force meeting that we went to, where we were invited to, and we appreciate that invitation. It was just fascinating to be in the room, to see the camaraderie with everyone there discussing their projects, and a lot of good-natured humor, bantering back and forth. But it was really quite an experience, which I just wanted to again say thank you for inviting us. I wanted to just a thought. It goes back to when we started the roadway fund that's now at $4 million. Back in the day, in early mid 2000s, I think we started around $2 million to that project, and it's grown over the years to be able to accommodate resurfacing. I just using that same template of a program, would it make sense to consider something along that lines for your I'll call them envelope projects? I mean, because there was a lot of them between the schools, where you're trying to keep things watertight, mechanical roof systems upon the roofs, roofing, replacements, et cetera, rather than have that be a top priority in both the school and the municipal. Is it possible to look at a fund like that for that type of project, and then only have to CIP those larger than usual expenditures? Just a thought.
I know that some of them could be grouped that way. I know many of our buildings are historic buildings. And so based on the specific building, sometimes we go for CPC funding for historic preservation. I know we
Okay.
spent $3.5 million, $4 million on town hall a number of years ago. That was all community preservation funds, Payne Black House, exterior restoration. So there's a number of projects, depending on what they are, that we can go for other funding sources. I know, like the US Custom House, there was a grant from Mass Historic for 2 of those projects to restore the outside. But for some of these buildings that aren't, we could probably put together a plan. I'd defer to Griffin to talk about how.
Actually, Mark, so the idea of creating a fund like the one, Jim, you mentioned, is more a Gareth and Mark Milne question.
Okay.
Yeah, just it's great having the cash funded program each year for roads. But ultimately to dedicate another portion of the capital trust fund specifically for just envelopes or building improvements, I think you'd have a tough time making an argument if that's their priority over something else being done.
Yeah,
as it is, we're probably underfunding roads still. So I think the way we currently have it structured, it gives us the opportunity to kind of weigh up each year or every 5 years, kind of how or what the highest priority is.
we have facilities and management plans for many of our buildings, and so a lot of these budgets are based on predictions, based on those facilities plans. But you always run into something that may be planned to be replaced in 3 years, but it actually fails this year. And so a lot of our priorities shift depending on what is happening at that particular moment in time.
I forgot about that. You spent a lot of time talking about those plans that are put in place for periods of years. So thank you for that reminder. Just a thought.
I think we can move over to Griffin.
Thank you, Dan. All right, I'll go through the top 10 DPW prioritized engineering projects. So project 1 of 57 is I think the project you were referring to, James, which is the public roads maintenance program. This year's request is $3.85 million. This is our annual roadway improvement project, which basically is what we utilize to resurface our public roadways, as well as make drainage improvements, smaller sidewalk improvements, smaller ADA improvements. So this is really what we utilize to maintain our roadways in the town. Any questions on that one?
Do we maintain about the same amount every year for that?
It varies in length as well as scope. So generally speaking, the funding is utilized in this manner. So we generally have a spring paving program and a fall paving program. Both of them are around $1 million round numbers, right? So that's $2 million of the program. We also have one big drainage contract every year where we do 20 to 30 sites where we make drainage improvements along our public roadways. So those are priority areas. We have a list of over 150 locations that need improvements. We pick away at 20 to 30 every year. That's about another $1 million of this program. About $400,000 or so, give or take, depending upon staff, goes to administrative costs. So it funds some of our staff who do the roads work. And then there is about $300,000 we use for our chip seal program every year, which is when we go into the neighborhoods and we do the popcorny type pavement restoration that everybody hates because you can't skateboard on it, but it does a good job extending the useful life of the roadways. And then we have some additional contingency that we utilize for unforeseen circumstances or designs of future projects and stuff like that.
Thank you.
All right, the next project I have was number 4 of DPW's priority 4 of 57. It's a curb ramps and sidewalks ADA transition plan. So this past year we retained a consultant to do an assessment of all the sidewalks and curb ramps on the town roads in the community. And this is it's called an ADA transition plan because it's an effort to have all of our pedestrian facilities ADA compliant, so American with Disabilities Act compliant. And what this program found was that a lot of our sidewalks and curb ramps are not compliant, whether they are just old and fallen and in need of repairs. So have ununiform surfaces, which brings them out of compliance, or they're too steep because they were built prior to slope requirements, or a number of various issues. But this identifies sidewalks and curb ramps in the community that are out of compliance, and this would be is envisioned anyway to be a recurring appropriation to start to improve and make the restorations to those facilities such that they're brought up to compliance. The next project I have is DPW rank 5 of 57. It's a public bridge maintenance and repairs program. We've had one of these requests funded about every 2 to 3 years in the last 7 years or so. And this is a continued effort to preventative maintenance of the town-owned bridges in the community. This year's request is for design of preventative maintenance for the Centerville River Bridge. This past year, we retained a consultant to look at all of our inspection reports that we have and put together prioritizations of what bridges we should be making improvements to. The Centerville River, well, the Oyster Harbors Bridge was number 1, but the Centerville River Bridge was the next priority that we identified, and so that's the project that's identified in this program this year. Oyster Harbors Bridge we'll talk about in about 4 or 5 more projects. So that's what this project is, and we would anticipate that we would continue this program to continue to get out ahead of preventative maintenance of bridges. Obviously, you want to maintain bridges before they get to the point of potential failure. So
you have a deferred priority list of all the bridges?
We have a prioritization list that, yes, so if you read the CWMP data sheet that or the CIP data sheet that we submitted, we're anticipating a request for the next 5 years to address the four bridges that we've identified that need improvements. So this year's request would be the first of the 5 years, so it's design. Next year would be design of the second bridge plus the construction of this bridge. Following year would be design, construction. We would leapfrog that way until we get through the four bridges in 5 years. That's the goal anyway.
Thank you.
The next project we have on here is private road repairs, School Street and Old Mill Road in Marston's Mills. So this is a project that, School Street and Old Mill Road, you drive down the road, you wouldn't expect that they're private roads, but they actually have never been accepted by the town, so they are not considered a public road. So through legislation that was passed a decade or two ago, the town is able to improve private roads in the community that connect to public roads, that are roads of common travel that connect to public roads. So School Street and Old Mill Road would put the check in those two boxes. So we've brought this project forward as a request through the CIP to improve these private roads that are roads of common usage that are in desperate need of improvement. One thing of note, in order to improve roads through this legislation, we cannot use the general fund. We can only use the Sewer Construction and Private Ways Fund, because that was the fund that was established for that. So while this is under DPW general fund projects, it actually would have to be funded through that funding source, unless these roads were taken and accepted. Then we could treat them like other roadways. So the proposal with this would be to do it with the Sewer Construction and Private Way Fund, but we have had some discussions about potentially looking to do it the other way, because we're putting a lot of stress on the Sewer Construction and Private Way funds with the other projects that I was talking about earlier. So
Griffin, School Street and Old Mill Roads, after they're renovated, will the town take them?
that would be a policy decision.
But for now, the town will regrade and repave them without any cost to the abutters.
Right.
That's the proposal with this, and that's what the legislation allows for roads of
Correct.
common travel that connect to public roadways.
Right.
Okay, the next project I have is Freshwater Ponds Management Plan. This is the recurring project that we've done for, I think this is going to be the 5th year. And this year's request would be to develop a management plan for Long Pond Centerville. So we've produced a prioritization list working with our conservation and MEA staff, as well as our DPW in-house expert, Amber Unruh. This was the next project pond on the list, was Long Pond Centerville. So that would be the proposal with this year's request. All right, next project that I have is number 12 of 57. It's the second piece of the aforementioned ponds management program, and it's a pond solution permitting and implementation. So we kind of handle these management plans and implementations in 2 steps. We do the management plan, and then we review the recommendations of it, and then would bring forward an appropriation request for the recommendations. We typically do that out of cycle and not through the capital program, because the reports are generally not prepared in time for the capital, the traditional capital cycle. So this project is listed as a to be determined, but this would be for implementing whatever recommendations are made of last year's management plan that we are in the process of finalizing, which is for Lake Wequaquet. So don't know what those recommendations will be yet, because we do not have the report. We're anticipating getting the report towards the tail end of fiscal year 25, and would anticipate bringing this request forward as an out of cycle request, should there be an appropriate request. In previous years, for instance, Shubal Pond, we brought forward an alum treatment request out of cycle, which was the recommendation of the report. So we would anticipate doing that at that time.
Do we continue to monitor all of our major ponds?
We do. So
It's an ongoing, yeah.
it's an ongoing program. So all of our great ponds in our community, we monitor them every summer, every spring through summer, and into the fall. And through this program, once we identify a pond for a management plan, we do a year of more intense monitoring, that informs the management plan. And then on the backside of it, after we go and implement the solution that is recommended, we do more monitoring after the fact to make sure the solution was successful, or if not, why, and what we should do at that point. So yes, absolutely, we continue to monitor all of our ponds.
So does the management plan include remediation?
Yeah, I mean, and that's ultimately what the goal is, right? So the management plans, what they do is they do the monitoring, which informs and identifies what the nutrient loads and inputs into the ponds are, which ultimately are the
Right.
reasons why the ponds have reducing water quality. And then they provide recommendations for remediating those issues. Sometimes the solution is ultimately you need to remove septic systems from adjacent to the pond. That has been one of the management plan results. And in that particular case, Long Pond Marston's Mills, it's programmed for phase 3, and so we're working with residents to try to do other potential short-term solutions that were identified, such as floating treatment wetlands, or innovative alternative septic systems as a stopgap until we're able to get sewers there. But for some of these treatments, such as alum treatments, were viable solutions that were recommended, and we've proceeded with implementing that.
Thank you.
The next project I have was DPW priority 14 of 57. It's the Pitcher's Way shared use path. This would install a shared use path along Pitcher's Way from Bursa's Way to Smith Street. So basically down to almost Craigville Beach Road. This was a request for design. This is a project that has been identified for a number of years as a priority to improve pedestrian and bicyclist facilities in the community. It's also identified on our complete streets prioritization plan. So we brought this forward as a design request in this year's plan. Next project I have, sticking to sidewalks, is a North Street sidewalk extension. So this project would extend sidewalks from the West End Rotary to Stevens Street along North Street in Hyannis. There's actually a gap in the pedestrian facility network there. For whatever reason, there were never sidewalks installed there. It's an important connection, and it's an unsafe condition currently. So we brought this forward as a priority project to install a short extension in order to improve pedestrian safety. The ninth project I have, which was ranked 18 of 57, is design and permitting of improvements to the Oyster Harbors Bridge. Every 2 years, similar to the public bridge maintenance repair project before, every 2 years, Mass DOT goes and does inspections of all of our bridges that we have in the community that are over, I think, a span of 20 feet. And they provide inspection reports. Every 2 years, we get an inspection report for the Oyster Harbors Bridge that is about 60 pages long. And that is directly related to the fact that it is a 75-year-old piece of infrastructure.
Right.
That is a mechanical bridge and is well past its useful life. So in order to keep that bridge functional, significant rehabilitation is necessary. This request would be for the design and permitting of that. We think that the ultimate rehabilitation is probably on the order of $5 million, and that might be low. And so at a certain point here, we may need to start planning for the end of the useful life of the bridge and a replacement. So, but right now, this is a rehabilitation in order to extend the useful life as long as we can.
That was the question, whether we would replace it at some point, because repairs are recurrent.
Absolutely.
It's not unlike the Bourne and Sagamore bridges, where they're having to invest money while they think about replacing them because they're deteriorating and they need to maintain them for safety purposes.
Right.
Yeah, so we've discussed internally for a number of years, and actually we've submitted CIPs in past years about doing a study for replacement of the Oyster Harbors Bridge, and we do intend to do that study. We actually were going to leverage some of our Chapter 90 allocation in order to do a study of what should be done with the bridge, whether indefinite rehab is the right solution, or if replacement is the right solution, what would replacement look like, et cetera, and how would we do that? So we do intend to do a study. It's not included in the plan because it's something that we are intending to do through those resources.
Good idea.
The last project I have was not the last project I have, but the last 10 of the top 10 is number 19 of 57 DPW priority. It was raised crosswalks on Main Street in Osterville Village. It was design and construction for raised crosswalks on Main Street in Osterville Village in 4 locations. This was a request that we received during the CIP process from folks in the village, and so we incorporated it into the plan for consideration. Certainly would be a safety improvement for folks crossing Main Street. So it was something that was included in the plan for consideration.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody have any comments or questions on these?
On
Thank
to raise a crosswalk, what's the cost to do that? Okay.
Yeah, so
Can't
for
be
the
that
4
much.
locations, it's actually fairly expensive. For the 4 locations, it's about $685,000.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So, because that's an all-in cost of designing, as well as the cost to build the raised crosswalk, but as well as we included the cost of the rapid flashing beacons, because anywhere
Okay.
you install a mid-block crosswalk, you should install flashing beacons, because that's how you improve safety. That could be something that could be removed, but we would always recommend including those in those locations. So it's an all-in cost. It includes decorative kind of faux brick, kind of similar to what you would see in Barnstable Village. So what you see in Barnstable Village is what we would do, and that was at the time we did Barnstable Village, it was about $50,000 a piece for those, and that's just the construction cost, not the design. So projecting that forward to today, we are estimating about $685,000 for those.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I'm not surprised that this request came from Osterville Village during town hall council race, when we were knocking on doors with John Crow. A lot of people commented that downtown Osterville, it was unsafe to cross the roads, that people drive too fast. One person said that East Bay Road, people drive too fast. But downtown was especially mentioned as in need of something to slow down the traffic.
So we had planned on answering the questions that you had submitted and then go through these top 10 of each.
Well, thank you.
We can, if there's any that jump out that you would like to ask about, we could come back for additional ones. We could touch on additional ones when we come back on the 12th to talk about the enterprise. Kind of leave it to your preference, however you'd like to proceed.
I
Happy to
will.
comply.
I will defer to the members of our CIP subcommittee to see if you have any further questions, or will you want for the presentation tonight. Jim?
I found this very, very helpful. It clarified a lot of stuff that didn't come through in the numbers necessarily. So I appreciate it. Thank you. I don't have any other questions for tonight.
Right. And I would say, we're gonna take everything you guys gave us tonight under advisement, and maybe a good way to proceed is if we have follow-up questions, submit them in writing, Dan, 3 or 4 business days in advance of our next, and then the enterprise session, which is in 2 weeks.
Yes.
Yeah, that
Right.
sounds great.
It's going to be on the water supply and water pollution control. So if you have any questions, submit them to Dan before then.
Yeah.
Solid waste too.
And solid waste, right. Okay, that's good. And the intent of pelting you with all these questions in advance is so that you knew what was on our mind, and I think it just helps facilitate the conversation and in our case, the clarification that Mark and Griffin and you gave for all of
Sure,
us.
yeah,
So,
we agree.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking the time and giving us these detailed explanations of the projects. It'll be very helpful for us because the more we know, the more accurately we can evaluate the submissions.
Yep.
I noticed that Craig is here tonight. Craig, do you have any comments?
No,
If-
just listening and catching up. Thank you.
Okay. I didn't know whether you wanted to make any comments about what you heard.
No, I haven't been involved with the capital improvement plan previously. I know there's a tremendous amount of work that went into every article, and everything has merits, and it's just a matter of prioritization.
That's right. Do any members of the committee have any further matters to bring up this evening?
for Dan and Griffin and Mark, I don't.
Okay.
So I
right.
think,
Okay, we're gonna jump off then.
Well,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you very
I
much.
really
Thank you.
Thank you.
appreciate- Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Take care.
Thank you, Mark.
thank you. Bye-bye.
Take
Okay.
care. Have a great night. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Yep.
I
Bye-bye.
appreciate it. So we will meet again on the 12th of February, and DPW is coming back to talk about water and pollution control. Is there anything else that you would like to discuss? Not hearing any. Is there I'm sorry?
No, I was gonna say no, I think we're good.
All right, not hearing any, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Hector, will you take the roll, please?
Lillian,
Yes.
Neil,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
and Hector's a yes.
And
And
Jackie.
Diane, yes, as
Oh,
well.
Jackie is
Jackie.
here too. Yes.
Sorry, Jackie.
Yes. Craig, thank you for coming, and Teresa, thank you for taking all these minutes.